Hey everybody, back again, looking at some DIY things and explaining some of the features of my aquarium in particular, and talking about how I do things and some of the stuff that I've learned over the years and how I've come to utilize it in the aquarium. In this video we're going to be looking at rocks and driftwood and using them in the aquarium and how to take care of them, how to clean them, what to expect from them, and things you should be worried about and things that you should not be worried about. Rocks. You see, I've got lots of rocks here. You know, if you feel more comfortable getting stuff in the store, that's fine, but you know, these videos are going to really be for people who are looking to go collecting, looking to get things, you know, particularly on the cheap is usually the reason, because you don't want to have to go to the store and spend 20 bucks on a rock that you can dig up out of the backyard. You know, people like me basically would much rather spend a day out in the woods or a day out on the river rather than just going to the pet store and dropping a bunch of money on things that you could find around you. So rocks, a lot of people, rocks and driftwood, a lot of people get worried about bringing things in from outside, and you know, how clean is clean enough, and what do I do to make sure that my fish aren't going to pick up any bacteria, or you know, is this kind of rock okay for the aquarium, or is this driftwood okay for the aquarium? I'm going to try to answer some of those questions here. In my aquarium you can see these rocks are going to be from around me. Some of these rocks come from rivers, some come from river banks, some of them come out of my dad's garden from when I was a kid. Some of these rocks I have actually quite a long history with me. I've had them in my aquarium for 20-25 years. You know, since I was a little kid I started doing aquariums when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and some of these rocks have made it along with me the whole way. So some of them, like that big flat rock right there, actually they used to be what I used to spawn severums on, and I spawned a severum on that several times. And so some of them I actually remember for specific things. There's that yellow rock there I had in my goldfish aquarium when my goldfish, who was 12 years old, that was in there with him, and so good memories of fish that have gone by. So they can, you know, once you have a rock that you like, you can keep it around for a long time, and they'll stick with you for a long time. You keep on using them over and over again, and you just save them, don't throw them outside, just keep them around with you, throw them in a box somewhere, and eventually they'll come to be used again. These rocks, like I said, are from my area, and in Chicagoland, which is where I'm from, a lot of the river banks are just made out of straight up limestone. A lot of random pieces lying around. Some of the places, the banks are just a straight cliff wall of just hard limestone. The nice thing about limestone is that it separates real easy, so sometimes you'll grab a big chunk, and by the time you make it home it's made itself into about 3 or 4 smaller pieces, which are perfect for the aquarium. Some of these larger ones over here you might not, you know, have a great use for, but for me I kind of tried to make like a little dam wall or a waterfall area kind of over here with a little log jam, simulated log jam, and some stacked rocks. So these ones, even though they're a little bit on the heavier side, they found a purpose. So, you know, getting a lot of rocks when you go out collecting, getting a lot of them, and you know, kind of picking through them and seeing what's going to be useful, and you know, looking at how it's going to look in your aquarium. Some things that you might think are not going to work real well may turn out to be useful over time. Most rocks you're not going to have to worry about, you know, leaching anything into the aquarium. Limestone, though, even though I've got a lot of limestone in here, that is the one stone that you should be kind of wary of. Limestone leaches a lot of nutrients into the water, a lot of calcium in particular. Limestone's real good for African cichlid aquariums because it raises the hardness of the aquarium dramatically if you've got a lot of it in there. In ponds, usually people, you know, if you get rocks for your garden pond, usually people who deal with ponds will tell you don't use limestone for inside the water. Keep it out of the water, because all those minerals that get leached into the water are great for starting algae colonies. I haven't found that to be a problem in the aquarium, and I've kept limestone in my aquariums for a real long time, and you can see that there's tons of it in here, and I don't have any algae problems at all. That's not saying that you won't. My system has been running for quite a while now, and so it's struck a nice equilibrium. Even with the addition of the rocks, which they used to not be in here a month ago, even with the addition of the rocks, I don't have any kind of blooms or anything like that. And that's just because I've got a mature setup and I know what my aquarium is going to do and what it's not going to do under certain circumstances. However, in a smaller aquarium, just be aware of limestone, just because it could spike your hardness, both your general hardness and your carbonate hardness pretty high. If you're worried about that, there's two great plants that will deal with that. One of them is our Vallisneria over here, the sometimes called water lettuce, but it's this tape grass here. This is jungle Vallisneria. It gets to be, at least in my aquarium, it can be like 5 feet long. You can see it draping over the top of the water over here. It gets pretty long. One of them sent up a flower recently. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's a little flower there. But Vallisneria, and also Elodea, which is another native plant. It's closely related to no, I'm drawing a blank. Common plant found in Anarcharis. There we go. Hate it when I have blanks. Elodea is very closely related to Anarcharis, and all three of those plants have the ability to absorb carbonate hardness from the water as their source of carbon instead of using CO2. So if you've got a lot of rock work in your aquarium and you're looking to remove some of the calcium carbonate or calcium deposits, carbon deposits from the water, the Vallisneria and Elodea and Anarcharis will help with that quite a bit, because like I said, instead of using CO2, they're able to use the carbon from calcium carbonate in the water, which is going to be a lot of what's getting leached into the water by rocks, and in particular by limestone. As far as collecting rocks, some of the stuff you're going to get from the water, some of the stuff you might just find laying around. If you find it laying around, you want to get most of the dirt off of it. You want to run it under the water, run it under a hose or something, and get a good scrub brush and scrub the dirt off of it. I suggest, and here's our first common question, our first common problem that a lot of aquarists who aren't used to just grabbing things out of nature run into, as far as they're asked questions about, which is, how safe is it? And I can tell you from my experience, I've been using rocks. Like I said, I've been using rocks from garden areas, from streams and rivers, stuff that I've dug up from the ground. I've accidentally bumped into it in my garden, and I just kind of chucked it in the aquarium. I have never once had a problem with any kind of bacteria outbreak or any kind of parasite or anything like that in collecting rocks from the wild. And that goes for thoroughly cleansing them versus giving it a little scrub and then just kind of chucking it in there. I've never ever had a problem with any of it, and that's not to say that you won't, but I think it is to say that some people really are kind of OCD about getting their rocks clean, and I just think that that's a little bit overkill. And as far as I'm concerned, you can see from my landscape here, my rocks are pretty well weathered. They've all got algae layers on them. I don't really mind having a little bit of detritus on them, because that will cause algae to grow on them. Things I don't like. This rock here, look how nice and clean it is. I don't really like that. I want my rocks to look like that, where it's got a little bit of algae on there. This big yellow rock right here, you can see where at one time, it's got like a line on there where at one time it was buried up to a certain point and it grew some algae on there, but the rest of the rock is completely clean, and I don't really care for that. So I like to leave a little bit of dirt, a little bit of grime on the rocks even when I'm cleaning them. This rock here is a good example. Not exactly sure what kind it is, but you can see it's got all that green on there. That's actually not algae. That's some kind of lichens or something that was growing on it when I collected it. and I didn't scrape it all off because it looks nice. And I threw it in the aquarium and have absolutely no problems with it whatsoever. Now, as far as common practice goes, though, that works for me, but like I said, it may not work for everyone. And if, you know, my aquarium is 120 gallons, even though I've got only 3/4 of it full, it's still much bigger than maybe most of your aquariums, which may be, you know, somewhere in the 20 to 55 gallon range. So what works in a big aquarium doesn't always work in a smaller aquarium. And so the common practice, what should you do with rocks? Get any kind of dirt deposit off of it. You don't want any kind of caked on mud or anything like that. Get that off of it. If there's some algae, depending on what kind of rock it is, algae could cause a huge problem, or it may just all die off. Either way, if you're in a smaller aquarium, it could cause some problems. An algae die-off could spike your ammonia and nitrite levels, and obviously algae growth. If you end up with a huge tuft of algae, that hair, especially if it's hair algae, that could turn into something really, really big and just start to take over your aquarium if you're not vigilant about it. So be careful with algae. Be careful with algae, and be careful with, you know, what things that you're actually visually finding on the surface of the rocks themselves. If you're getting rocks out of the ground as opposed to in the water, make sure that you get any kind of worms or insects out of that, because not anything that you should worry about the fish about, but those things, if they're coming out of the ground, they're not meant to live under water, and so they're going to die in your aquarium, and once again, it's going to spike. It's going to cause an ammonia spike or a nitrite spike, and you don't want that. The other thing that you want to do after you scrub it is boil them. Just get an old crock, you know, an old pot or something like that. Fill it with some water. Put your rocks inside of it and boil that thing for about 20-25 minutes, and it should be perfectly fine. That's going to kill any kind of bacteria. That's going to kill any creepy crawlies that you didn't see on there previously. That's going to kill everything that's living on there, and so it should be perfectly fine for your aquarium afterwards. So that's rocks. Shouldn't have any problems with rocks, but once again, you know, the things to look out for are algae growth on the rocks, any kind of mud or dirt deposits on the rocks, limestone and mineral nutrient leaching into the aquarium, and those are the big important things when collecting rocks. Now on to driftwood. Driftwood is going to be pretty much same issue. If I would suggest that you never ever collect sticks from the yard. Always collect your driftwood from the river. Make sure that it's actual driftwood. It's been floating in the water. Two reasons for this, which is that most driftwood has already been in the water for a decent amount of time, which means that it's soaked up enough water that it's not going to need to go through a soaking period for very long. Also, all of the tannins and the sap that's in the wood has already leached out into the lake or pond or river, wherever you're collecting it from. And if it's some kind of a species that could leach something into the water that's toxic, like oak or cypress, juniper, things like that, cedars, most of that's already going to be leached into the river that you found it at, and you're not going to have to worry about that getting into your aquarium. Finding sticks in the yard, you never know how old they are. It may not have been weathered enough. It may still have sap in it, and anything that's still in the stick is going to leach into your aquarium, and that can potentially kill all of your fish. Oak especially, oak and juniper. Juniper is highly toxic, and you do not ever want to put fresh juniper or cedar into your aquarium. It will leach toxins into the water. Oak has high amount of tannins, and if it doesn't just turn your water brown, it will leach out enough toxins and enough tannins into the water it could potentially kill your fish again. So my suggestion is always go to the river and find stuff that's actually in the water, not just on the banks. You know, go to log jams, beaver dams, things like that. Find sticks that have been in the water for quite a while and look nice and weathered. With driftwood, you know, again, you want to give it a good brush. You don't want to brush it as hard as you might brush a rock, just because you're going to get rid of a lot of the wood that's on the outside of it, and it's going to look scraped up, and it's not going to look real natural. It's going to have a real bright appearance to it because you're going to get rid of all the old brown wood that's on the outside that gives it a nice aged appearance and a nice natural appearance. So you don't want to scrub them too hard. The more important thing is checking the outside of it, looking for things that you can see visually, and soaking it for, I would soak driftwood for at least a week, if not more than that, before putting it in the aquarium. And then, of course, boiling it. And if you can't boil it, bake it. Put it in your oven and bake it at about 300 degrees. You know, keep an eye on it. You don't want to torch the thing. Make sure it's not too dry, because you can start a fire, obviously. But make sure that you heat it up enough to kill anything that's inside of it. And once again, you know, if you find it and it's, you know, partially submerged, you might get like some sow bugs or some worms inside of it, maybe some centipedes, and those aren't going to cause a problem to your fish. Dragonfly nymphs are really the only big deal that you're going to find in the river if you're collecting inside of a river. But at the same time, you don't want those things dying inside of your aquarium, because that's just going to spike your levels up. Another thing that you want to watch out for is moss. Now, if the branch is completely submerged and the moss is growing underwater, you'll be fine. The moss will live. Even if you boil it, the moss usually, because moss grows by spores, it'll usually pop back at some point. If the conditions are right inside your aquarium, it'll come back. But if the moss is growing outside of the aquarium, and I've actually got a good example of this, because you can see all this moss on top of this guy here. This actually started growing after I put this in the aquarium. I didn't find this way. But all this moss started growing up here, and this is a terrestrial moss. This isn't an underwater moss. So if they grow outside the water while it's in your aquarium, that's fine. It means that it's getting the optimal conditions. But if you find moss on your sticks when you're collecting, and that stick happens to be outside of the water, more likely than not, that moss is all going to die if you submerge it inside your aquarium, in which case you're going to get another spike again. You don't want that. So if you find moss, pull it all off, unless you're absolutely positive that it's an underwater variety. Just get all that moss off of there. And of course, any kind of dirt or anything, get that off too. Another thing that you might want to scrape off is any kind of bark, anything that looks like it's can be flaked off and can be pulled off of the outside of the wood. You don't want that, because that's going to soften up inside the aquarium, and that's going to eventually fall off, and that's just going to add more unnecessary organic elements to your aquarium, which is going to cause rot, and it's going to cause, you know, certain levels to go up, and you don't want that. So get any kind of bark off, get down to the hardwood, get down to the heartwood, and you should have some good driftwood that should last with you for quite a while. Some driftwood can last a long, long time. You can keep it from aquarium to aquarium over many years. So that should answer a lot of questions as far as the hardscaping goes. No, you know what? Wasn't planning on doing this, but might as well, as long as I'm here. Different kinds of sand. So some of these, now you can see I've got native species in here, and fish that we're looking at right now is called an eastern hognose sucker. And some fish species prefer sand. They prefer sand over gravel. And so what I actually have is, because I've got live plants in here, I have a live plant mix, which let's see, I'm using Floramax, which is just black plant gravel, and seems to work pretty well for me. And that's laid over a sand base. And it's just regular old play sand. I didn't like the sand by itself. The white play sand, well, two things. One thing is that the play sand is so small in diameter that what it tends to do is it tends to cake, and any kind of detritus that lands on it doesn't break down properly and doesn't penetrate it. And so you can see I added some actual regular old aquarium gravel, and then of course I've got the plant base in there too. Adding larger particles to the sand will help detritus penetrate the soil and will help it break down and get a nice mulm layer, which I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's here, that'll help a little bit better. You can see where the sand is. It's a little bit whiter on the top, and then there's a nice dark strip right there, and that's the mulm layer where fish poop and detritus and things like that have built up and gotten down into the lower layers of the substrate, which is what you want for plants. But the sand, though, the reason that the sand helps, and I think I mentioned this in another video, I'm not sure, but one of the things that I'm shooting for in keeping aquariums, some people keep aquariums for different reasons, and my personal reason for keeping aquariums is to keep fish and to culture fish and to raise them in their natural habitats and to be able to view them the way that they should be viewed, which is, as I believe, which is the way that they are found in nature, rather than putting them in a situation where they have to act differently because it's not what they were meant for, it's not what they were built for, it's not part of their natural habitat. And having sand in your aquarium, when you have fish like this sucker here, you can see he digs his face into the sand and then ejects it out. He ejects it out of his gills. And that's what they're meant to do. Fish like this live in silty areas, or areas with sandy, silty areas where they can pick up the sand and just root through it, stick their faces into it, and find crustaceans and insects and all kinds of things inside the sand. And to deny them that, to have really coarse gravel or something that's too big for them to suck into their mouth and spit back out, or sharp sand or anything like that, where they're not able to do what they're naturally supposed to do, to me is just kind of contrary to why I'm raising fish. So having sand in there, I think, is a good thing when you've got those bottom feeders like that. And even in tropical aquariums, this goes for things like Corydoras catfish. Corydoras catfish, their eyes are set back on their head. They're not forward facing, but they're very far back, and that's because in nature they like to dig through the soil, and if you give them sand, they'll stick their faces in it and eject it out their gill covers, just like these suckers will. So in choosing an aquarium substrate, I would also say that you should think about the fish that you've got and the fish that you plan on keeping, and what is it that they're naturally built to do, and what is it that they're built to encounter, and what is natural to them. And think about the fish and think about how they're going to respond to what it is that you're putting in the aquarium. So I hope you enjoyed that. The next video is going to be on plants and what I do to take care of plants, and some DIY stuff with the plants, and I'm going to show some alternatives, some dosing alternatives, and some things that you can use that you can find locally just at your normal hardware store or at the grocery store that will help you dose your aquarium. And we'll go over my lighting, and I've already done the video on the filter, and so I'm just going to do a big series on DIY fish keeping, and that goes for the fish too, because these are all wild caught fish. So hope you guys enjoy this. Hope you enjoy a little explanation of how to take care of rocks and driftwood, and if you've got any questions, just leave them in the comments, and see you next time. Thanks.